She started laughing when I got down on one knee, and that's when I knew my life was about to change completely. I'd spent 3 weeks coordinating with the staff at Denver's Botanic Gardens to make everything perfect. This was where Lily and I first met 18 months earlier at a community workshop about green energy solutions, where she'd approached me after my presentation on sustainable building materials and asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I'm Owen, 31, and I work as a structural engineer specializing in sustainable construction. I make decent money, own my condo, and I thought I'd found someone who shared my vision for building something meaningful together. That morning, I'd arrived early to position her favorite desert roses along the pathway leading to the conservatory, hired a discreet photographer to capture the moment, and carried the ring I'd designed specifically for her, recycled platinum with a small but beautiful diamond, engraved with the coordinates of where we first met. I'd been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. The conservatory felt right because Lily always said she loved how the glass dome made everything feel like you were in your own private world. I walked her through the succulent section, pointing out the different species while my heart hammered against my ribs, and when we reached the spot where the afternoon light filtered through the glass just right, I took her hand and dropped to one knee. "Lily, you've made me believe in forever," I started, opening the ring box. That's when her face went from surprise to horrified, and then she just started laughing. Not nervous laughter or happy tears, this was the kind of harsh, incredulous laughter you'd hear if someone told you the most ridiculous joke you'd ever heard. "Oh my God, Owen, are you serious right now?" she said, stepping backward. "I'm 24 years old. I'm not ruining my 20s with marriage." The words hit me like cold water, but what made it worse was realizing we had an audience. A family with 2 young children had wandered into the conservatory, and the parents were staring at us with obvious discomfort. The father quickly gathered his kids and ushered them toward the exit, but not before I heard the little girl ask, "Daddy, why is that lady being mean to the nice man?" I closed the ring box with a sharp click that seemed to echo through the entire glass dome. "I thought we wanted the same things," I said quietly. "I do want the same things, eventually," Lily replied, not even bothering to lower her voice. "But I'm in my prime right now. I want to travel, explore, figure out who I am. Marriage is something you do when you're ready to settle down and be boring." The photographer I'd hired was still there, probably wondering whether he should stay or go, looking as uncomfortable as everyone else in the situation. "So when exactly did you think you'd be ready for that?" I asked. "I don't know, maybe when I'm 30. 32? I haven't thought that far ahead." She shrugged like we were discussing weekend dinner plans instead of our entire future. "You should have asked me what I wanted instead of just assuming I'd want to get engaged because you decided it was time." Standing there in that beautiful conservatory, surrounded by thriving plants and natural light, I realized I'd been the only one planning a future together. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the gentle hum of the climate control system maintaining perfect growing conditions for the plants around us. I could feel the weight of the ring box in my hand, this symbol of commitment that had suddenly become evidence of my complete misunderstanding of our relationship. "I think I should take you home," I said finally, my voice sounding strange even to me. "Yeah, probably," Lily agreed, already pulling out her phone to check something that was apparently more important than this conversation. As we walked back through the gardens, past the carefully arranged roses I'd coordinated and the spots where I'd imagined telling our future children about how I'd proposed to their mother, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just rejection, this was revelation. I'd been building dreams on a foundation that didn't exist, making plans with someone who saw me as temporary entertainment rather than a life partner. The photographer approached us near the exit, clearly unsure about the situation. "Should I still send you the photos?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, handing him an extra 50 for his trouble. "I don't think we'll be needing them." Later that night, sitting alone in my condo while Lily went out with friends to decompress from all that intensity, I stared at the ring box on my coffee table and wondered how I'd gotten everything so wrong. I spent that night on my brother Sam's couch, unable to face going back to the apartment Lily and I shared, and by morning I'd made a decision that surprised even me with its clarity. I returned the ring to the jeweler first thing Monday morning, accepting a 65% refund because of the custom engraving, and while the loss stung financially, it felt like cutting away dead weight. The jeweler, an older man who'd helped me design the piece, took one look at my face and didn't ask any questions, just processed the return with professional sympathy and wished me better luck next time. I drove straight from there to our apartment, knowing Lily would be at her yoga instructor training until evening, and started the most methodical exit I'd ever executed. I left a brief note on the kitchen counter where she'd be sure to see it. We're clearly incompatible long-term. I think it's best if we don't contact each other. I'll handle breaking the lease. No explanations, no arguments, no room for negotiation, just facts stated plainly. I called my company's HR department and requested an immediate transfer to our Portland branch, something I'd been considering for months anyway because of their focus on earthquake-resistant affordable housing projects. My supervisor, understanding that sometimes people need fresh starts, expedited the paperwork and had me approved for transfer within 72 hours. I packed everything that mattered into 2 duffel bags, clothes, my laptop, essential documents, and the few personal items that were truly mine rather than ours. Everything else, the furniture we'd bought together, the kitchen appliances, the decorative touches that had made the place feel like home, I left behind. I transferred my 401k, updated my address with the bank, and paid the early lease termination fee without blinking, treating it like any other business expense. The hardest part was systematically blocking Lily on every platform we'd connected through Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, even Spotify where we'd shared playlists. I changed my phone number through my carrier, set up mail forwarding through Sam, and deleted our shared Google Calendar that had been full of future plans I'd apparently been making alone. By Thursday morning, I was on a one-way flight to Portland with my entire life reduced to what fit in the overhead compartment. Sam drove me to the airport, shaking his head in admiration at how efficiently I'd dismantled 18 months of shared life. Most people would have stuck around to fight or at least get closure, he said as we waited for my boarding call. What's the point? I replied, watching planes taxi outside the terminal windows. She told me exactly what she thought about our future. I believe her. The flight gave me 3 hours to think about what I was doing, and honestly, the main emotion I felt was relief. I'd spent so long trying to build something with someone who saw commitment as a limitation rather than a foundation, and now I was free to find out what my life could look like when I stopped trying to convince someone to want the same things I wanted. Portland welcomed me with typical October drizzle and overcast sky that somehow felt more honest than Denver's relentless sunshine. I rented a studio apartment in the Pearl District, furnished it with basics and a few pieces that reflected my actual taste rather than compromises, and spent my first weekend learning the Max light rail system. My new job started Monday, and I threw myself into the earthquake-resistant affordable housing project with renewed focus. There's something deeply satisfying about calculating load-bearing requirements and designing structures that can withstand natural disasters, problems with clear parameters and logical solutions, unlike relationships where you can do everything right and still end up rejected in a garden. My new colleagues welcomed me with the casual friendliness that Portland was known for, and when they invited me for drinks after work, I discovered I'd forgotten how good it felt to have conversations that weren't walking on eggshells around someone's unpredictable moods. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up wondering what I'd done wrong or how I could fix something that apparently hadn't been broken from Lily's perspective, just insufficient for her plans. 8 months into my new life in Portland, I'd established routines that actually felt sustainable, rock climbing at Smith Rock on weekends, joining a local sustainability meetup group, and even going on a few casual dates with women who seemed genuinely interested in building something rather than avoiding it. I'd started seeing Zoe, a 29-year-old environmental lawyer I met at a climate policy discussion, and for the first time since Denver, I was remembering what it felt like to be with someone who asked thoughtful questions about my work and shared similar values about the future. That's when Lily found me. It started subtly, the way these things always do. I noticed someone had been viewing my LinkedIn profile repeatedly, always from Denver, Colorado, and then came the comments on my climbing gym's Instagram posts. At first, they seemed innocent enough, questions about sustainable construction partnerships, and recommendations for Denver transplants interested in environmental advocacy. But something about the phrasing felt familiar, too familiar. The writing patterns were distinctly hers, the overuse of ellipses, the habit of ending statements with question marks like, "This sounds amazing. Do you work with companies in Colorado?" And "Such inspiring work. Would love to connect about similar projects." I'd spent 18 months reading her texts and emails, and despite the fake names, I could recognize her voice anywhere. When I started posting occasionally about dates with Zoe, nothing dramatic, just casual photos from farmers markets or coffee shops, the comments escalated. Anonymous messages started appearing on Zoe's law firm's Facebook page, carefully worded to seem concerned rather than malicious. "Has anyone else noticed some concerning patterns with Owen Martinez's commitment history? Just want to make sure this firm associates with people who have solid track records with relationships and professional obligations." The messages always came from newly created accounts with generic names and stock photo profile pictures, but they all had Lily's distinctive writing style and her tendency to frame attacks as helpful concerns. I started documenting everything, taking screenshots with timestamps, noting IP addresses when possible, keeping a detailed log of every incident. My background in engineering had taught me to approach problems systematically, and this was clearly a problem that required systematic solutions. I consulted with a cybersecurity specialist recommended by my company's IT department, and together we traced several of the anonymous accounts back to IP addresses at coffee shops near Lily's apartment in Denver. The specialist, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel who dealt with online harassment cases regularly, was impressed by my documentation but not surprised by the behavior. "Ex-partners who can't let go often escalate gradually," she explained, showing me charts of typical harassment patterns. They start with monitoring, move to indirect contact, then progress to interference with new relationships. The good news is you're documenting everything correctly. The bad news is this probably won't stop on its own. She helped me set up additional security measures on all my accounts and taught me how to preserve digital evidence properly, warning me that people like Lily often interpreted any response, even blocking, as encouragement to try harder. "The goal is complete disengagement," Rachel explained. "Don't engage, don't acknowledge, just document and prepare for potential escalation." I followed her advice religiously, but it was disturbing to realize how much effort Lily was putting into monitoring my life from 1,000 miles away, creating fake personas and elaborate schemes just to leave anonymous comments questioning my character to people I was dating. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd laughed at the idea of commitment was now demonstrating an obsessive level of commitment to disrupting my attempts to move on. Zoe, when I finally told her about the situation, was more puzzled than concerned. "So your ex-girlfriend, who rejected your proposal because she didn't want to be tied down, is now stalking you online because you actually listened to her and left?" she asked over dinner at our favorite Vietnamese place. "That's exactly what's happening," I confirmed, showing her some of the screenshots I'd collected. "It's like she wanted me to fight for her, and when I didn't, it became this obsession with proving she made the right choice by making sure I can't be happy without her." Zoe studied the evidence with her lawyer's eye for detail, noting the patterns and escalation tactics. "This is harassment, clear and simple. You might want to consider documenting everything for a restraining order if this continues." I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but Rachel's warnings about escalation were starting to feel prophetic. The digital harassment was one thing, but Lily's next move crossed into territory that made my skin crawl. She'd somehow leveraged mutual connections in the sustainability industry to secure a consulting contract with my current project, specifically requesting to work with our team on community outreach for the net zero housing development I was leading. The project roster was public information, so she'd known exactly what she was doing when she applied. I was reviewing foundation specifications in our temporary site office when my project manager knocked and said we had a new consultant joining us for the community engagement phase. "Lily Peterson from Denver," he said, checking his clipboard. "Specializes in green building advocacy and public relations. Should be here any minute." The name hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced through contingency plans. I'd hoped that 8 months and 1,000 miles would be enough distance, But apparently Lily had decided that wasn't sufficient for whatever endgame she was pursuing. When she walked into the site trailer 20 minutes later, wearing professional clothes I'd never seen before and carrying a leather portfolio that screamed expensive consulting fees, she performed surprise perfectly. "Owen," she said, eyes widening as if this was the most shocking coincidence in the history of the construction industry. "I had no idea you were working on this project. What are the odds?" The three other team members in the trailer looked between us with obvious curiosity, waiting for some explanation of our apparent connection. "We knew each other in Denver," I said simply, then immediately excused myself to call HR. I spent my lunch break in my truck on the phone with both my project manager and HR representative, explaining the situation with professional calm while internally fighting the urge to drive straight to the airport and transfer to our Seattle office instead. I provided them with copies of Lily's rejection letter, documentation of her online harassment, photos from our relationship that proved our history, and the timeline of her consulting contract application that coincidentally came right after my LinkedIn activity showed progress on this specific project. "This creates a significant conflict of interest," the HR representative agreed after reviewing my documentation. "We'll need to implement protocols to ensure all interactions go through a third party, and we'll be monitoring the situation closely." Within 24 hours, HR had established strict guidelines. All communication between Lily and me had to go through our project coordinator, we couldn't be alone in the same workspace, and any concerns about professional conduct would trigger immediate contract termination. Lily seemed genuinely frustrated by these restrictions, as if she'd expected our forced proximity to create opportunities for personal conversations about our unresolved issues. Instead, she found herself trapped in the professional role she'd manipulated her way into, unable to address the personal agenda that had motivated her cross-country consulting pursuit. But Lily adapted quickly, shifting tactics from direct confrontation to public relations warfare. 2 weeks into her contract, she published a lengthy blog post on her newly created professional website titled, "Navigating Toxic Masculinity in Green Construction: When Men Weaponize HR Against Women's Career Advancement." The post didn't mention me by name, but anyone familiar with our situation would recognize the thinly veiled references to a former colleague who used institutional power structures to silence a woman's voice in sustainability advocacy. She described HR protocols as intimidation tactics designed to protect male fragility, and painted herself as a victim of workplace discrimination who was just trying to contribute her expertise to important environmental projects. The post gained traction in sustainability circles, shared by people who didn't know the full context and saw it as another example of women facing professional retaliation. Several of my colleagues forwarded it to me with concerned messages, asking if I knew about this troubling trend in our industry, not realizing they were showing me a calculated attack on my professional reputation disguised as social justice advocacy. My hands were shaking when I forwarded the post to our legal counsel, along with all the documentation I'd collected about Lily's harassment pattern and the suspicious timing of her consulting contract. Within 48 hours, Lily's blog post had been removed following legal pressure, but not before dozens of people in our professional network had screenshotted and shared it, creating exactly the kind of reputational damage she'd intended. The blog post removal seemed to trigger something desperate in Lily, as if losing that platform for her narrative pushed her toward more direct and increasingly unhinged approaches. Packages started appearing at my apartment building, small boxes left with the front desk that contained pressed flowers from the Denver Botanic Gardens, handwritten letters analyzing our communication breakdown, with the kind of detail that suggested she'd been obsessing over every conversation we'd ever had, and copies of relationship self-help books with entire passages highlighted in yellow marker and annotated with notes like, "This explains why you shut down emotionally, and we could have worked through this together." The building's front desk staff grew uncomfortable with the frequency of deliveries, especially when Lily started including specific instructions about when I should receive them, as if she was orchestrating some kind of romantic campaign rather than harassing someone who'd explicitly asked for no contact. I documented everything, photographing each package before disposing of the contents, but the psychological impact of having reminders of our relationship constantly appearing in my space was wearing me down in ways I hadn't anticipated. Worse than the packages was discovering that Lily had somehow figured out my climbing schedule and started appearing at the same outdoor crags I frequented on weekends. Smith Rock is a popular climbing destination, so her presence there could be explained as coincidence, but when she showed up at more obscure spots like Broughton Bluff and Rocky Butte, places only locals knew about, it became clear she was actively tracking my movements. She'd set up her gear within sight of my routes, always maintaining plausible deniability about the coincidence while making sure I saw her watching me climb. The most disturbing incident happened when Zoe and I planned a weekend camping trip to Mount Hood. We'd kept the plans private, sharing them only with close friends and family, but when we returned to my apartment building Sunday evening, we found Lily sitting in the lobby at 11 p.m., looking like she'd been waiting for hours. "Owen," she called out brightly, as if running into me in my own building's lobby at nearly midnight was the most natural thing in the world. "I was just in Portland for a work emergency last-minute client meeting, and I thought maybe we could talk like adults and finally clear the air between us." Zoe's hand tightened on my arm as we approached the elevator, both of us recognizing the calculated nature of Lily's timing and location. She'd somehow known we were away for the weekend and positioned herself to intercept our return, creating a confrontation in a semi-public space where she could control the narrative if things went badly. "There's nothing to clear," I said, pressing the elevator button repeatedly while Lily stood up from the lobby seating area. "We're not in contact for good reasons." "That's so unnecessarily hostile," Lily replied, her voice taking on that wounded tone I remembered from arguments about money and future plans. "I flew all the way here just to apologize properly and maybe find some closure for both of us. Don't you think we owe it to what we had to at least have one honest conversation?" The elevator arrived and Zoe and I stepped inside, but Lily moved toward us as the doors began to close. "I'm not crazy, Owen," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I just want to understand what went so wrong between us. I've been going to therapy, working on myself, and I realize I made mistakes, but you just disappeared without giving us a chance to fix anything." I called building security from my apartment, and they confirmed that Lily had been in the lobby since approximately 9 p.m., claiming to be waiting for a friend who lived in the building. When security asked which friend, she provided a fake name and apartment number, then insisted she must have been confused about the address. The police arrived 20 minutes later and issued a formal trespassing warning while Lily broke down in tears, insisting she wasn't stalking anyone and just wanted closure from a relationship that had ended badly. "This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I was talking about," she told the officers, gesturing toward me and Zoe. "He can't handle mature conversations about our shared history, so he calls the police instead of just being an adult about this." The trespassing incident was the final push Zoe and I needed to install a security camera in our hallway and begin the process of applying for a restraining order, something I'd hoped would never be necessary but had become unavoidable as Lily's behavior escalated from digital harassment to physical stalking across state lines. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and I spent that time compiling what had become an extensive documentation file, 6 months of screenshots, email logs, building security footage, witness statements from my colleagues and building staff, and a detailed timeline showing the escalation pattern from digital monitoring to workplace infiltration to physical stalking. The judge, a middle-aged woman who clearly dealt with these cases regularly, reviewed my evidence methodically while Lily sat across the courtroom with a lawyer she'd hired to contest the order. When called to present her defense, Lily painted herself as a confused ex-girlfriend who was simply trying to achieve closure and had been misunderstood by an oversensitive former partner who was weaponizing the legal system to avoid adult conversations. Her lawyer argued that coincidental encounters at public climbing areas and a single visit to my building didn't constitute stalking, characterizing the blog post as legitimate professional commentary that had been censored through intimidation tactics. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge noted the cross-state coordination, the fake online personas, the manipulation of professional networks, and the escalating pattern of contact despite clear requests for no communication. The temporary restraining order became permanent, prohibiting Lily from contacting me directly or indirectly, coming within 500 feet of my residence or workplace, and creating any social media content that referenced me professionally or personally. I thought the legal resolution would finally end things, But Lily violated the restraining order within a week by creating yet another fake persona to join my climbing gym. She dyed her hair black and was using the name Lisa Peterson, probably thinking the subtle name change would be enough to avoid detection, but her climbing style and the distinctive way she organized her gear gave her away immediately. The gym staff recognized her from photos I'd provided and called the police, leading to Lily's arrest on a Friday afternoon while she was belaying some unsuspecting climber who had no idea he was being used as cover for stalking. The arrest triggered a mandatory psychological evaluation as part of her bail conditions, and during the subsequent court proceedings, I learned that Lily had been diagnosed with abandonment anxiety disorder and narcissistic personality features, clinical terms that explained but didn't excuse the year-long harassment campaign that had consumed so much of my mental energy. Her therapist's report, which became part of the court record, described a pattern of behavior where romantic rejection triggered obsessive attempts to regain control and validation, often escalating until external intervention forced cessation. 2 years passed with no contact after Lily served a brief jail sentence and completed court-mandated therapy. During that time, Zoe and I got engaged in a simple ceremony at Crater Lake, no elaborate planning, no photographers, just the two of us and the question that mattered most: do you want to build a life together? When she said yes without hesitation, I finally understood what it felt like to be with someone who wanted the same things I wanted, when I wanted them. We bought a house in southeast Portland, adopted a rescue dog named Atlas who came with separation anxiety that we patiently worked through together, and started talking about timelines for children without anyone laughing at the idea of commitment. The irony wasn't lost on me that Lily's rejection had ultimately led me to someone who appreciated the very qualities she'd found suffocating: my tendency to plan ahead, my desire for stability, my belief that love should be expressed through consistent actions rather than grand gestures followed by long periods of uncertainty. Sometimes, when Zoe and I were working in our garden on weekend mornings or reviewing our budget for the house renovations we were planning, I'd catch myself thinking about the person I might have become if I'd stayed in Denver, constantly trying to prove my worth to someone who fundamentally didn't want what I had to offer. The restraining order had given me more than legal protection. It had given me perspective on how much energy I'd been spending on someone who had made her priorities crystal clear that day in the botanical garden. Zoe never made me feel like I was too much or too serious or too focused on the future. Instead, she'd look at our 5-year plan for paying off the house and say things like, "I love how thoroughly you think through possibilities," or, "It's so comforting to be with someone who actually wants to build something lasting." The contrast between someone who saw planning as suffocating versus someone who saw it as caring was the difference between constantly walking on eggshells and finally being able to breathe freely in my own relationship. 5 years later, I was reviewing structural plans for a new affordable housing project when my phone buzzed with a message from Sam, my brother who still lived in Denver and occasionally provided updates I never asked for but secretly appreciated. "Thought you should know," his text read. "Ran into our mutual friend Mike at the brewery, and he mentioned Lily moved to Costa Rica last year. Apparently married some yoga instructor and started a wellness retreat business." The news felt surreal but not surprising. Lily had always been drawn to reinvention narratives and the idea of exotic locations solving internal problems. According to Sam's follow-up details, she was running retreats focused on helping people release toxic relationship patterns and find authentic connection, which struck me as either genuine growth or elaborate projection, possibly both. 2 weeks after Sam's update, a formal letter arrived at my office, forwarded through several intermediaries including Lily's therapist and our respective legal representatives. The letter was handwritten on expensive stationery and addressed to me with careful formality. "Owen, I want to take full responsibility for the harassment and stalking that disrupted your life in Portland. My behavior was inexcusable, driven by my own untreated psychological issues around abandonment and control. I have spent years in intensive therapy working to understand and change these patterns. You deserved none of what I put you through, and I hope you have found the happiness and peace that I tried so hard to take from you. I wish you genuinely well. Lily." I read the letter twice, then showed it to Zoe, who was sitting at our kitchen table helping our 3-year-old twin daughters work on a puzzle that had been frustrating them for 20 minutes. "What do you think?" I asked, sitting down next to her while the girls argued about whether the blue piece belonged in the sky or the ocean. "I think she's probably sincere," Zoe said thoughtfully, studying the careful handwriting and formal tone. "But I also think it doesn't really matter whether she's sincere or not. That chapter of your life is closed." She was absolutely right, and we decided together to handle the letter the way we'd handled everything else in our relationship, as a team making a deliberate choice rather than reacting from emotion. That evening, after the twins were in bed and we'd finished cleaning up the dinner dishes that somehow multiplied when you weren't paying attention, we built a fire in our backyard fire pit and ceremonially burned the letter, watching Lily's final attempt at contact dissolve into smoke and ash. Standing there in our garden while the fire crackled and our rescue dog Atlas dozed contentedly nearby, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that awful day in the Denver Botanic Gardens. The house around us was filled with the sounds of family life, children's toys scattered in organized chaos, Zoe's law books stacked on the dining room table next to my engineering journals, photos from camping trips and birthday parties covering the refrigerator like evidence of a life fully lived. The woman I'd once thought I wanted to marry had become a cautionary tale about the importance of choosing partners who actually wanted to be chosen, while the woman I'd actually married was upstairs probably reviewing contracts for environmental cases that would make the world slightly better for our daughters to inherit. I realized that real love wasn't about grand romantic gestures or winning someone over through persistence and planning. It was about finding someone who chose you willingly and consistently through both ordinary Tuesday evenings and unexpected challenges, someone who saw your desire to build something lasting as a gift rather than a burden. Lily's rejection, devastating as it had felt at the time, had been the catalyst for building a life based on authentic compatibility rather than forcing incompatible pieces together and hoping time would somehow make them fit.